Good morning, LT. Happy New Year. I hope that the first couple weeks of the school year, or the second semester, have been positive for you. I know that we've came back after a long break to some not so pleasant weather, but rest assured spring will be here soon and we'll be able to enjoy some better weather. So this morning is pretty unique. We traditionally find ourselves in the field house for positive reasons. Whether we are celebrating or honoring our veterans in November, celebrating a state championship, highlighting some of our students' musical talents, or in a couple weeks we'll be celebrating the all-school assembly. Whatever the reason, we're usually in here for a positive reason. Today's assembly is different. We are here because we are concerned. We are here because we care about each one of you. And maybe most importantly, we're here because all of you have asked for this, either directly or indirectly. We've heard what you've told us, whether that's in individual conversations, social media, or otherwise. We're making an effort to hear you talk to us. We know that vaping and the use of e-cigarettes was recently identified by the CDC as an epidemic. Think about that word for a second, an epidemic. So we are here because we are concerned, we're here because we care, and we're here because we're listening to what you have to say to us. Our goals for this morning are, number one, we want to have an honest conversation about vaping and e-cigarette usage. We want to share some of the latest research. And so we have a guest speaker here who's going to share his knowledge and expertise on this topic and share with you not only the science and the research behind vaping, but also the marketing aspect and how it's specifically marketed to teenagers. And then at the end, we want to give our students, you guys, a chance to get some of your questions answered. Last week, you had the opportunity through an online link to submit questions. We have some of our students here that are going to ask those questions and get those answered by our expert. Most importantly, we don't believe for a second that one assembly is going to convince everyone who is vaping to quit. We don't think that for a second. We do believe that this is one small part of our effort to convince you that if you are vaping, you're doing long-term damage to your body. And we don't know all of the long-term effects. And so our goal is to have that honest conversation, share with you some facts and education, and give you a chance to get your questions answered as well. This is a responsibility that I believe we all share, every single person. Students, staff, community members, parents, we all share the responsibility to curb this, to prevent it, to limit it. Every time, I will say this too, every time we are together in an assembly, I am amazed at how respectful, how attentive you guys always are. And so in advance, I would ask for that same respectfulness of our guests today, including our guest speaker, but also our students that are going to come up at the end and speak to you as well. So once again, I thank you for your attention. It's now my pleasure to introduce the Director of Addictions at Linden Oaks Behavioral Health, Dr. Aaron Weiner.
All right. Good morning, everybody. We're gonna use this one. Good morning, everybody. Oh, thank you. When I say that to a room of physicians, they usually just stare blankly at me. Hi. So as mentioned, I'm the director of the Addiction Service Line at Linden Oaks Behavioral Health. I'm a psychologist by trade. I oversee all of what we do with both adults and kids with addiction, who have addictions and need some help. And I'm here today to talk to you about vaping and pot, because what I found when I talk to kids, when I talk to families, when I talk to even honestly to physicians that there's a lot of things that people don't know. And so we're going to talk about vaping today, as mentioned, but beyond that, I want to talk to you about vaping, I want to talk to you about pot, but I also want to talk to you about money and business, because this plays a huge role in what's going on here. And more specifically, there are very rich people who want to make a lot of money off of you, and you specifically, young people, right? These are people, they don't care about your long-term health. They don't care about your well-being. What they actually want is your money. And this is the way that it's always been, right? We've done this with every addictive product. And what the idea here is you catch them while they're young, right? You catch them while they're young, and then they stay with you for the rest of their life. Because that's the way addictive products work. You get someone started, and then it never stops. So these are people, the people who are marketing, who are selling these products, these are people who think that they can fool you. These are people who think that they can use you. And my job today, if I do it properly, is to give you information so that you go into this with eyes open. So that if you make a choice to do this, and of course you always have the choice, right? But if you make the choice, you know what's going on. You know what it does to your body. You know the people who want you to do this. And you can make a choice for yourself. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. So e-cigs and vaporizers, what are these things? Essentially, it's a device to heat a substance and create a vapor. So whenever you're trying to extract a chemical from something, you have to get it out somehow. If you eat it, for example, right, your digestive enzymes break it down and it's absorbed through your stomach lining. You can get it out in a lot of ways. Another way to do it is to burn it, right? That's how cigarettes are smoked. So you burn it, it releases the chemical. Vaping is just another way to extract a chemical. You heat it high enough to release the chemical, but below the point of combustion. And that's really the idea behind it. Now, the idea where it came from originally was that anytime you burn something, it's even worse for you, right? So, like, you're not supposed to eat burnt toast. You're not supposed, honestly, even barbecue to some extent has some little amount of carcinogen in there. But burning something creates more carcinogens. And so the thought is that if we can extract this chemical without lighting it on fire, it's better for us that way. And so that's the idea behind it. Now, what a lot of people aren't talking about is that it's still not good for you, right? It is still harmful, and more on that in a minute. But you can vape a lot of different things, right? You can vape things that are liquid, like pods, like Juul pods, or you can get refills. And then, so in terms of like what the vape device actually looks like, let me do this so that I can use my pointer properly. We up now? We're up now, right? So they all have the same general idea, where you've got a battery, a cartridge, or a chamber if you've got a dry vape pen, where you might put flower in there, marijuana. The atomizer, where if you've got liquid, oftentimes what it does here is you've got wicks that draw that up into the heating coil, which then heats it to the point where you can extract the chemical and then inhale it through the mouthpiece. So they all work in a generally similar way. It doesn't matter, again, what brand it is, Juul or not. A Juul is just another version of this, right? It's all the same basic idea. But that's the core of it. So why have they caught on, right? There's a lot of products, things that come, that go, that haven't been labeled an epidemic by the FDA or caught on as much as this has. A big one is flavors and taste, and more on that in a second. But one of the things we know is that flavors appeal to young people. And that's part of the reason why folks do this. There was one study, actually this was put out by the Surgeon General, that found that 85% of young people using vapes do it because of the flavors. And if it didn't taste the way that it did, they probably wouldn't do it. People think they're harmless, and again, more on that in a minute, but there's this idea of, like it's again, quote-unquote, safer than smoking, as if that makes it safe, or it's not actually a problem. We'll talk about what the science says about that. They can have that appealing form factor, which can also make them easy to hide. So we all know, right? You can basically, like, put a Juul in your fist. You can blow it down a sleeve. You can conceal it really easily, right? All these things can happen. And so in terms of folks who are trying to use in school, it's an easier way to do it, right? So that's one of the reasons why these have caught on. And the smell is much less prominent. They're not picked up by smoke detectors. We all know these things, right? So if this is something that you wanted to do in school, it makes it a lot easier to do it. And they're new, right? If you think back even the past 5 years and what's been cool, things rotate, right? Things come up, they catch on. Juuls just came out in 2016, I believe, is when they were released. Vaping, it's relatively new. But all of these are reasons that you'd get from people who are using vapes, which is what it might look like on the surface. But more than all of this, and truly more than all of this, vaping is a business. This is not about because people just wanted to create something that tasted good because the world needs more of this. This is about making money. So much of this life is all about making money, and this is no different. And not only that, but this is a business of addiction. And when you are in the business of addiction, is all about how can I get as many people using my product as I can and using it for as long and as much as I can. And everything is directed towards that. And in the business of addiction, they all know there's a lot of money to be made from teenagers. 90% of all addictions, not just vaping, 90% of all addictions start for people when they are teenagers. If you are using something when you're a teenager, that is a strong predictor of something that might follow you for the rest of your life. Most of the time, by the time you're in your 20s and 30s, a lot of people don't make it back there. So if you are in the business of addiction, of course you're targeting you guys, right? You are their market. And not only are you their market, but you stay their market for the rest of your life. How do you do this? You make it seem appealing. You make it seem cool. You lower something we in the field call perceived risk. When the perceived risk of something goes down, use goes up, right? Because in general, people think that it's less risky. All of this is very shrewd, very smart marketing, because there is a gap between what the science is saying about these things and what the public is saying about these things. And when that's the case, the question mark about why is that going on, the answer is that it's about the money. It's the business. This is them reaching in and changing perception so that you do what they want you to do. So let's talk about why. So back in 2009, there was something called the Tobacco Control Act passed, which put tobacco under the jurisdiction of the FDA. And the first thing that they did at that point was they said, you cannot put flavors, other than menthol, in cigarettes or cigars. And the reason for that is because we know that it disproportionately appeals to young people. We know that this is what's getting young people into smoking, right? And we all know that smoking is terrible for your long-term health in a number of different ways, probably the first and foremost being cancer, but there's a lot of reasons. And so these things, you guys have probably never seen these things, and it's because they've been banned for about the past 10 years, right? So we know that vaping appeals to young people, but vaping companies know this, and they still do it because they can, because nicotine is not tobacco. Nicotine, right, the addictive component of tobacco, it's a component. But it is not tobacco. So they know there's this loophole, right? They know that they can get around it, and they do it. Juul does it. Everybody does it because, again, they need to go at young people to get you hooked to keep you for the rest of your life. Now, the FDA, when they declare this an epidemic, have been pushing. They've been saying we need to do things so that these businesses can't exploit our youth like the big tobacco did. But because they have money, and because with money you can buy lobbyists and influence, this has not happened yet, even though we've known this has been a problem for a long time. They know exactly what they're doing. Now, marketing, I want to talk to you for a second about this. Marketing is always on purpose, right? These things are very well thought out. Marketing young, like here's an example. This is an ad, right, for a Monster energy drink meant to appeal to young people. If you think about it, like how many 45-year-olds do you know drinking Monster? Probably very few, right? Maybe some, but probably very few, right? And this ad, right, it's colorful. It looks like there's a lizard or a dragon back there. That's not really something that speaks to people generally in their 40s. Here's an example of marketing old. Oh, look, he slept through the night. That's amazing for some of us. You know, look how happy he is. There's even like a little butterfly, right? So this is the difference, right? Let me show you guys another one. So this is marketing young, discover with Oreo. So you've got a astronaut and pictures and playwithoreo.com. Again, this is marketing younger, and this is marketing old. Arthroplex, look how happy she is. Look at those pink dumbbells. You know, like but this appeals to this market, right? This appeals to this market. Marketing old depends, right? Finally, I can enjoy the moment without having to worry about urinating in my pants. And look at this woman here, right? She looks nothing like you. Nobody's hula hooped for like 20 years. Like this is the difference. But even with the pens, take a look at this. Marketing young. I dropped my pants for underwearness, right? So they know, even depends, right? They know what they're doing. Because bladder control issues actually can happen when they're younger too. So they're saying, what's an untapped demographic? Young people. And so what do? They get young, attractive people, and they have them wearing Depends, right? It's always on purpose. It's always on purpose. So let's look at vaping, right? What do these look like? Does this look like Arthroplex, or does this look like something else? This is marketing young, right, guys? This is marketing young. Light it up. Someone jumping through some sort of portal-y thing. I don't think anyone over the age of 50 can even bend like that anymore. You know, like we get kind of rigid, right? And here's an ad of an actual billboard in another state. I don't always vape, but when I do, I think you stop believing in Santa Claus at like what, 9, 8, 5, right? But maybe older. I'm sorry, did I just ruin it for some of you guys? Oh no. All right, that was a misstep. That was a misstep. All right, so let's bring it back, guys. Let's bring it back. Stick with me for a second. Stick with me for a second. So Juul, one of the things that we've heard a lot about, right, is how Juul is not actually saying that. They say we're not marketing at kids, but take a look at these ads, right? This is where they started. And there's been some advertisements that have shown, not advertisements, I'm sorry, some features that have shown that they hired social media influencers because they know, right? You guys are on social media. So let's hire the people who speak to you. Let's advertise. This is not the marketing old, right? No one's got a hula hoop, right? These are marketing young. And this is where they started because, again, this is a business of addiction. And there's been some exposés on this because they're saying, we don't want kids to do it. We don't want kids to do it. But their actions speak very differently. I want to talk a little bit about Juul specifically because I know that one is the most popular right now. They have a huge amount of the market share. They actually dominate 68% of the e-cig market. But they're saying they don't want kids to use. So they're saying, we're going to throw $30 million to combat underage vaping. We only want people who are adults, who are already smoking to use, is what they say. Yet at the same time, a study just came out. This was in October. Teens are 16 times more likely to use Juul than older age groups. Now, just think for 1 second. That means that about 95% of Juul's income comes from you guys. 95%. They would go out of business if teenagers did not vape. They would go out of business. So whatever they're saying, $30 million, I'll show you in a second, that's like spitting into the wind, right? That's nothing to these people. So they can put on a PR campaign and say, we don't want kids to use, but when 16 times teenagers versus adults use your product, you need them. So they're going to push just enough to make it seem like they care. They're going to say all the right things while at the same time they're taking your money at the expense of your health, and they're selling the flavors that they know have been banned from cigarettes because they appeal to you, right? So they can say what they want. Now, something else that's worth noting from these guys in particular, you may or may not have seen this. This happened in December, that Marlboro, the people who make Marlboro, Altria, they bought into Juul at $12.8 billion for a third. So quite literally, big tobacco. And I know this was a little before your guys' time, but big tobacco was a huge force in this country. They made their own scientific studies saying that smoking was fine. They tried to make the public think that it didn't cause cancer. It was a huge deal. And all they were trying to do was profit off of us. They literally now bought into Juul. They now have a large stake in Juul. And something else worth mentioning. So at Juul, when this went down about a month ago, there were some employees who thought, I don't want to sell out to big tobacco, because that's literally what they did. I don't want to sell out to big tobacco. So what did Juul do? And this is true, you guys could Google this too. They literally gave all of their 1,500 employees an average of $1.3 million as a holiday bonus. Every single employee got $1.3 million from big tobacco. Yeah, for real, right? So that is what we call hush money, right? That is what we call sit down, shut up, and keep working because now you're a millionaire money, right? Could you imagine, like, if you were the janitor at that place? But like this is literally what happened, right? And when we talk about money influencing how people feel, how people act, how people think, Altria, Marlboro, they are pros at this, right? They've done this for decades. They know exactly what they're doing. But again, none of this is an accident. So how is this translated? So the 2018 National Youth Tobacco Survey came out about 2 months ago, and what they found was that we've seen a 78% increase in the amount of high school students who are vaping, 48% up in middle school. That is tremendous. That is a huge jump, and it means that what these companies are doing is working. right? This is how 16 times more teens use this product than adults, right? What they are pushing is getting, the folks who are vaping are drinking the Kool-Aid, right? They're believing what they hear. The marketing is working. And what we've also seen is that this has led to the first increase in high school and middle school tobacco use, because one of the links that we found is that if you vape, you are more likely to smoke. And we have been trying for years to stop kids from smoking, and it's been working. And now, for the first time in decades, it's going back up. And it's because of this vaping industry. It's because of that link. Vaping leads to smoking for a certain percentage of users. So let's say for a second, maybe I've convinced you, maybe I haven't, but let's say for a second you believe me and that you recognize you are being targeted by these companies for money. So what? Why does it matter, right? A lot of companies might target you. They want to sell you a lot of things to your age demographic. Why does this matter? So let's talk about vaping and health, because this is the only reason why I'm here, right? I wouldn't be here if vaping was fine, right? It was okay to do, particularly for someone who's a kid. So where this information is coming from is a massive 750-page report released by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. Came out about a year ago. And the reason why this matters is there's a lot of science that you're going to read, or individual studies where it gets blown out of proportion, or it's like hearsay. You never know, is it the industry that's funding it? Is it actually true? Or even, is it not solid science? There's a big difference. And if you guys have taken research methods already, you'll know this. There's a big difference between a small study with, like, say, 50 people and an epidemiological study that has 20,000, or something that's a randomized controlled trial versus a self-report study. You need solid evidence. And so what these people do is they gather huge amounts of studies, things that have been replicated, things that are solid, and put it into conclusions ranked on strength. And so what I want to talk to you guys about today are the things that they basically have either conclusive or very, very strong information about. So first, vaping includes numerous toxic substances other than nicotine. So it is not just like nicotine in water or water in a flavor. There's a lot in there. You might have heard a diactyl, what causes popcorn lungs, but in some of them we found formaldehyde in some. It's very different, right? So depending on who makes the vape juice that you're using, there can be different stuff inside there. But we know for a fact that it's not harmless. There are toxic substances in there, and the vaping aerosol contains heavy metals. We're not sure whether or not this is coming from the liquid itself or from the heating coil, but essentially it flakes off, and these heavy metals, these are also toxic. These are things you do not want in your body. The different components have different levels of toxins. Again, depending on who makes it, what you use, even how you use the vape pen, that changes the molecular composition of what you're inhaling. So there's a lot of variability there. And we do know that vaping aerosol causes DNA mutagenesis. This is what causes cancer. So this is a very firm conclusion. It causes the thing that causes cancer, DNA mutagenesis from vaping. This is not up for debate. This has been replicated. This is absolutely true. And vaping is addictive, and particularly with the nicotine in there, that is the addictive component of a cigarette. So it can and will hook you. Maybe if some of you are vaping right now, you've already started to experience cravings if you were to try to stop. So skin or eye contact with the juice can actually cause seizures or anoxic brain injury. That means that your brain starts to die in places, kind of like a stroke, because it's not getting oxygen. So the juice is not meant to come in contact with your skin, and it's not meant to be injected or drinking it either. That could actually kill you. We've seen that happen. That concentrated amount of nicotine can be very harmful. So something, again, if you're handling these things, be very careful with. Don't leave them out near small children. There can be serious effects to that. Now, it is important to acknowledge vaping does have fewer toxins than smoking, right? So that is not untrue. However, that does not mean none, right? So everything that I just talked about still applies. And teenagers who vape, as I mentioned, are more likely to smoke, and we found that they're more likely to smoke more when they get there. So the bottom line on this, if you are already poisoning yourself by smoking, you will poison yourself slightly less if you vape instead. And that's basically the bottom line of it, because that's what smoking and vaping, that's what it does to you, right? You are basically saying, I'm going to put this carcinogen, this cancer-causing substance, and all the other things that are in there, I'm going to put it into my body. For whatever reason you're giving yourself to do that. But if you vape, yes, there are fewer in there, but if you are not smoking cigarettes, you are absolutely better off not vaping, and by the way, it's also illegal. So I don't know if that matters to anyone in here too, but under 18 or under 21 in some places, it's also actually illegal to have nicotine or nicotine-related paraphernalia on you. So there's also that bit. But again, if you're not smoking cigarettes, you are putting toxins into your body that do cause DNA mutagenesis, which does cause cancer, and that's why this matters. So there is an industry very hard at work here to recruit you. So really the biggest thing here, before we get to marijuana, but is that they want your business. They want you to use their product, and they want to get you early. So they don't just sell e-cigs. I want to go back to this previous slide. You may or may not have caught this here, but packs, right? A lot of you guys might not know, actually, that the people who make Juul, which is basically responsible for promoting this to kids, also make marijuana vape pens, and this probably looks very familiar, right? The arrow there on the right. This is something that you can use for flour, or you can use for extracts like wax, shatter, right? These industries are linked. They always have been, right? These guys know exactly what they're doing. That's where Juul came from. So I want to talk a little bit about marijuana as well, because this is coming up too. So here's what the marijuana industry is doing. Cap'n Munch, Fruity Loops, those are cakes that have THC infused. Here's Keef Cat, right? So like these are not marketing for your parents, right? These aren't the people buying this stuff. Here are lollipops, right? Again, like have you ever seen anyone over 40 with a lollipop? Here's some more candies, here's some more candies. So again, this is not marketed at folks outside of the young demographic, because again, that's not how addiction works, guys. This is all a business. This is all a business. Nothing is by accident, right? So they're doing the same thing. So I want to talk a little bit about THC and marijuana and some things that I hear from a lot of kids, from a lot of adolescents, from a lot of teenagers, just to put some ideas to rest for you while we're on the subject. So one thing that I hear a lot is, wait a second, isn't marijuana medicine? Isn't it actually like a medicine and isn't such a big deal? So I could literally, I actually, at noon, I'm going to be talking to physicians for an hour about this specifically. So I can't go into it that much right now. But what I can say is this. There are some things that certain cannabinoids, right, like CBD, right, components, that they can be useful. However, what's going on in this state is very different than what the literature says. This is a study that came out. I'm just going to pull out the most important part here. For the majority of conditions that any state has approved, findings indicate that there is insufficient evidence to support the recommendation of medical marijuana at this time. Essentially, we call it medicine, but medical marijuana has not passed through any licensed physician board in this state. They basically went straight to lawmakers and said, we want to call this medicine and give it to people because we think it's going to help them for their condition. And none of these people were physicians. They did an end around the FDA, right? You could probably never imagine a drug company doing this, right? Being like, we want to get this to the public, so instead of going through the FDA, we're going to go to lawmakers and have them make it legal, right? Pfizer or Abbott would absolutely, it would be ridiculous, right? But that's actually what's happened here. So it's important to know, and again, there's a lot more to this subject. While there are some uses, like for MS, CBD is good for MS, for example, and for CBD is good for seizures. That's something a lot of people don't know. Marijuana is not good for seizures. CBD is good for seizures, right? And that's a very important distinction because they are not the same thing. It's not what you think it is when we call it medicine, and we could talk a lot more about that. So, but isn't it just a plant, right? Not that bad for you, doesn't really matter. Again, we could talk a lot about this, but I want to dive into just one particular element here that matters to you guys as kids. I'm sorry, I don't want to be pejorative, as young adults, because that is what you are. This study came out last year looking at the neuroanatomic alterations in cannabis users. Neuroanatomic alterations means your brain does not grow properly when you do this. And actually, there was a study came out about a week ago that showed that even very infrequent use can change the trajectory of brain growth. But what this is looking at, this was a big, what we call a literature review or meta-analysis, where you put everything together. And basically, anything in red here was a study that found that it influenced the growth of your brain if you use frequently, starting in high school or earlier. And this one here, the hippocampus, gray means they didn't study it. Blue means they studied it and didn't find a difference in someone's brain. Red means they did. Hippocampus is involved in memory. So in about 80% of studies, they found that it impacted the growth and development of the part of your brain responsible for memory. This other one with a high concentration here, the prefrontal cortex, that's used for executive function, so planning, your ability to think abstractly, things that are useful if you want a career. In about 50% of studies, they saw changes in brains, and then in the brains of those who were examined. And then here you can see it was about 50-50 in some other brain regions as well. This is not something you really want to play around with. Now here's another one. This was a study looking at cognitive abilities and working memory, perceptual reasoning, so this is your ability to kind of do visual spatial tasks, memory, delayed memory here, so long-term memory, and then your inhibitory control, which is about being able to control your actions. And the blue line is basically the least amount of cannabis or no use, and the red one is the most cannabis use. And you can see on each one of these graphs, the blue line is on the opposite side as the red line. So if blue is low, you want it low. If blue is high, you want it high. And these are actually enduring effects. So these aren't things that just go away when you stop smoking if you've been smoking for a while. These are things that actually stick around. Here's another thing I hear a lot. At least it's better than alcohol, right? We could, again, talk about this a lot. I want to show you just one study. This came out about a month ago looking at drivers of brain aging. So how much your brain ages from different things. This was not actually a study just looking at marijuana. What they found was that using cannabis takes 2.8 years off your brain life and was actually the second highest factor here behind schizophrenia. Alcohol, by the way, was down here at 0.6 years if you use it frequently. So at least in terms of what's happening to your brain, it is far worse. And actually what's interesting about this slide I was just on with your cognitive functions is that this study, the purpose of it wasn't just looking at marijuana. They were actually looking at what is worse for long-term cognitive development, alcohol or marijuana, and it was hands down, marijuana is the worser one, right? So it's something that a lot of people, if you've been hearing it, again, this is the difference between what you get from medical journals and what you might hear from your friends, what you might read online. There is a big gap between the reality of the situation and the public understanding, and that is all the industry or even rationalization, what people currently doing these activities want to feel or want to think, because otherwise they'd have to think hard about what's on these slides. But again, those of us in medicine, those of us who are with the science, we've known this for a long time, and it just keeps coming out. So a couple other important points about marijuana I want to make sure I make before we move on. Today's is much stronger than it used to be. So a lot of people, particularly parents, feel like, oh, like marijuana, like I used marijuana when I was a kid, was it that big of a deal? Things have changed. So since 95, even before then, Woodstock pot, THC content was about 3 to 4%. By 2012, it was up to 12%. By 2016, it was actually up to 16%. By now, actually, 2019, what they're seizing off the street is about 20%. And actually, you can buy things, even from our medical dispensaries, which, again, this is an issue, that goes up to 28% THC. 30% THC. So today's marijuana is about the same as lighting up like 7 joints from Woodstock at once. That is today's marijuana, and people don't realize, particularly those of the previous generation, that it's different. You may not either. More THC, though, more consequences in terms of addiction, and again, we're talking more today about vaping than marijuana. We could do a marijuana talk another time, but basically the higher percentage of THC you get, the worse it is for your long-term health and development. It is absolutely, and this is huge, 100% unsafe to drive or drive high or drive with a stoned driver. This is a huge misconception that it's okay. We have so many studies again about this in terms of your what we call lateral control, your ability to control side to side, judge speed, your reaction time. Everything changes. And another study found that a lot of people who are too high to drive by any objective measure think that they're fine, and they do it anyway. Now, I was here actually about 2-3 months ago, speaking at a breakfast, I think it was for faculty, and I heard something that was disturbing to me on a number of levels in terms of data that's collected from seniors, actually, you guys. The first one was disturbing. It was that 9% of seniors, 9% of you guys in this room, 1 out of 10, have either driven drunk or driven with a drunk driver. And that is something that was really startling to see. This was from your own reporting. But beyond that, driven high or driven with a high driver was 38%. So the message is getting out there. Even if 9% is 9% too many driving drunk, almost four times that, essentially, have driven with someone who's high or driven high. And we are seeing accidents spike up, just FYI, in states where use increases, where it's been recreationalized, where when you recreationalize, more people use, more people are getting into accidents on the road. So please understand, it is not safe to drive high. It is not safe to drive high, and please do not do it. THC use can cause psychosis, and it's not as rare as you think. So this is something that people say, oh, like reefer madness, or oh, it's this propaganda trying to stop me from using. So we probably have, at any given time in our inpatient hospital, 3 to 5 folks just like yourself who are in there with psychotic symptoms, some of which never go away, from THC use. And the higher THC you use, the more likely you are going to be one of those people. So this is particularly an issue when we're talking about dabbing, right? When we're talking about wax, these extracts that can be up to 90, 93% THC. A lot of the time, that's what we're seeing. But even that, right? 28% THC is different than 3. It is heartbreaking to see these folks, and it's not just something that they would have developed anyway. We have research as well, beyond just what I see in my own clinics. We have research that shows that it causes this. So be careful, be careful. And the last bit here that hopefully matters to you, we have a lot of associations that find that the more you use marijuana, the higher the chance that you're going to drop out of high school or out of college, the lower GPA that you'll have in either of those places, and the lower lifetime earning potential. You talk to people later on in life, the more they say they've smoked pot, the less money they make on average. So something to keep in mind, right? These are nothing is deterministic, right? But averages, correlations, national level data doesn't happen by accident. And thinking that you're the one where that won't apply is a really risky way to think. It may be true, but it's a risky way to think. So here are the takeaways, and then my understanding is we have some questions. So we'll pivot over to that. There are very rich people trying to get even richer at your expense. This goes for vaping, this goes for pot, and this is normal for these guys, so don't get fooled. It's not harmless, neither is pot. Number one recommendation I have for you today, think for yourself and make your own decisions. Question where your information comes from, right? Know where that's coming from. My recommendation, though, if you want to have fun, do it in a way that doesn't have any impact or any negative impact on your long-term health. So with that, let's pivot to the questions. I also just I was told to mention as well that there's a night of chat day coming up tomorrow, so it's going to be in the library. I think you can ask questions of national level staff. So if you have more questions about vaping, more questions about marijuana, feel free, of course, to reach out to me as well. Your administrators can help you do that. But night of chat day is also coming up tomorrow. It'll be in your library.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Waterman shared that part of the leading reason that we wanted to meet this morning was the hue and cry from all of you behind the scenes. Now, I understand the realities in a room of 2,000 of your peers. It might be cool or uncool to have questions to make that seem, but behind the scenes, what you're telling us are things like, I don't even want to go to the bathrooms. You're telling that to the community, you're telling that to your parents because that's how you feel. And so we gave about a week ago our students and staff an opportunity to pose questions, and what we've tried to do is to distill those down. And for the sake of time, we've asked students from the Coalition for a Drug-Free Lyons Township. It's a very important and active organization. Ron Melka is here with us today from the coalition as well. But we're going to, we got some questions that came from you, and we have distilled those. And representing you this morning, we've got Jaden and Spiro and Greg. And so they've got questions ready, and they're going to pose those to Dr. Weiner. So are you ready for that?
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Let's do it.
So who's first?
Okay, so what are the known effects of vaping besides pulmonary damage like popcorn lung?
So in terms of the effects of vaping, a lot of it has, again, to do with this DNA mutagenesis and what it does long term. Nicotine, vaping, cigarettes, these aren't substances that that have this immediate impact, which is part of how people rationalize using them. What you're doing is you're slowly causing problems in your body that build up over time. The issue, though, is that because they're addictive, you keep doing it over time and you don't end up stopping, and you make your way towards those consequences.
How much nicotine do users of vapes typically consume, and how does it compare to smokers? And how much nicotine do common vapes have?
Yeah, great question. So that's variable. So in terms of it, so your average cigarette has 12 milligrams of nicotine in it. In terms of vaping, you can, when you buy it, you can actually change the amount of nicotine in the juice, right? You can go up and down, make it what you want it to be. Generally, though, your standard Juul pod has about the same amount of nicotine as a pack of cigarettes. So while I think they come in 5 milligram and 3 milligram drags. So I mean, you guys can do the math, but really a lot of it depends on how often you are vaping in terms of the amount of nicotine you intake.
How do you see this problem as being related to other problems with teen drug use?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so part of what we're finding actually is that a lot of these things are linked because you start beating down a behavioral pathway. So essentially, if the way you have fun or the way you have fun with friends is by putting a substance into your body that causes an effect, then that starts to become normalized and brings you down kind of a different, we'll call it recreational track, and with sometimes even a different peer group than you might otherwise do. And those peer groups oftentimes are doing other things as well. Vape pens, for example, as well, it's you can, even if it's not designed for it, you can put a THC extract in there. So it's very easy to make that jump as well from nicotine to THC. And one thing very easily can lead to another. Again, we hear this all the time from the folks, the adolescents, the young adults who come through our treatment program, that they started with either cigarettes, vaping, or THC in some form, and then eventually, because they were involved in that lifestyle, it was much of an easier jump to move to something else. To put this in perspective, if someone was to walk up to someone who'd never used a substance before in their life and say, hey, do you want to tie off and inject heroin? They'd probably be like, absolutely not. That's a crazy idea. But if you've been working your way up to that over time, right, with bars of Xanax, marijuana, pills, maybe you've been even snorting heroin, right? There's a lot of ways you can make your way there. Then when you get to that point, it doesn't seem like as big of a jump. So again, we're going all the way back to the beginning again in terms of where does this start. But the bottom line is that that lifestyle is associated with a lot of things that not everyone will do it, right? Risk does not equal determinism. But when you put yourself in those environments and hanging out with people who do that a lot, associations, and again, the statistics don't lie. So what's putting you on the best trajectory for health and for getting what you want out of life is ideally the best course.
Can you talk about the scientific research that has been done on this topic and what, if you know any, is currently underway?
Mm-hmm. So we talked a little bit about the science already. My recommendation for you, so there's a lot going on, there's a lot that's been done. The report that I drew my conclusions from, the one from the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, you can download that for free. You can just grab it. And actually they have a really nice, although it itself is 750 pages, they have a conclusion where they sum everything up that's about, I think, 5 pages long, and if one really interests you, you can go into that big report and read that thing as well. So if anyone's interested, again, just Google it, you'll find it, you can download it for free, but there's a lot done and there's a lot still going on.
Can you talk a bit about devices with THC in them rather than nicotine? Which is worse and why?
Well, I think we talked a little bit already about the differences between the two. Again, they're different drugs. I wouldn't say the devices are any worse than another. They're just ways of, again, extracting the chemical to put in your body. I'd say that in terms of long-term ramifications, THC absolutely is. I mean, the nicotine doesn't cause the same brain changes that we're seeing that the THC does. So between the two, absolutely there are more harmful effects from THC, particularly at the high doses that we're seeing these days. But again, just because something, just because one thing might say like you're jumping out of like a 5th story window, that doesn't mean that jumping out of like a 3rd story window is better. Ideally, you don't jump out of any windows. So like I don't want you to take away, it's like, oh, it's just nicotine, I'll use nicotine. It's also not good for you. All right, I think that's it, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Again, on behalf of our entire faculty and staff, I wanted to thank you, North Campus, for your attention. Two things. Number one, Dr. Weiner has brought some brochures. In the event that there are several of you that would like some follow-up information, we've placed those so that as you exit, that information will be available for you. And then I think, as we also alluded, there will be another event. It's a national conversation scheduled for tomorrow nationally with experts on the topic as well. That's going to be occurring throughout the day in the North Campus Library. I know that some of you are in the library at various moments in the day, and that will be available thanks to our librarians. And so would you join me one more time in just saying thank you to our guest, Dr. Weiner. Okay.